Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and Speech Therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. This podcast is designed for the adult medical speech-language pathologist. Most of our audience members work in settings such as acute care hospitals, private practice, outpatient hospital clinics, and inpatient rehabilitation hospitals. Each episode has an accompanying audio course on SpeechTherapyPD.com and is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. The content of this course is based on the research and experience of the presenters. The listener is responsible for researching to determine if the information and skills taught are appropriate for their clients, students, or patients. SpeechTherapyPD.com does not necessarily endorse, recommend, or favor the information shared, nor any of the claims, opinions, statements, offers, or services made by the presenter.
Hello, and welcome everyone. My name is Renee Garrett, and I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. Before we get started, we have a few items to alert you to. Each episode is 60 minutes and will be offered for 0.1 ASHA CEU. Here are the financial and non-financial disclosures. Financial disclosure for Pamela Rowe is that she receives an honorarium from SpeechTherapyPD.com for her guest appearance on this podcast. Her non-financial disclosure is that she is a member of the National Black Association of Speech, Language, and Hearing and in Boswell's GAP Committee and Partnerships Committee. She is also a member of the Society of Public Health Education, SOPHI National and Florida chapters, and the American Public Health Association, or APHA. My financial disclosure is that I'm a paid employee of a private consulting firm in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and as the host of this podcast and other webinars on SpeechTherapyPD.com, I do receive financial reimbursement. I'm also an adjunct instructor for both James Madison University and Old Dominion University. My non-financial disclosure is that I'm the secretary for the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. Questions can be written in the chat box or the Q&A and will be answered throughout the presentation. Now, without further ado, we welcome our guest, Pamela Rowe, MA, CCC-SLP, who is the clinical director in an adult pediatric therapy practice with 7 Florida locations, providing speech, occupational, physical, and respiratory therapy services. That is the clinical director of Pamela Rowe, MACCC-SLP, LLC. I apologize for that little hiccup. Pamela is a student in the University of Indianapolis's Doctor of Health Sciences and Master of Public Health programs. She is co-author of Putting Your Dreams to Work, Keys to Setting Up Your Therapy Practice, and Start Your Engines, a roadmap to your clinical fellowship year. As a continuing partner with various state agencies, Pamela enjoys empowering individuals to communicate and use their voices within their community. So we'll stop calling you Pamela. Welcome, Pam. It's so nice to finally meet you and work through this tonight. I'm just really excited about this topic.
I am too. Thank you so much for having me. This is a much needed discussion to have regarding this topic, and I'm sure we're going to have a very robust engagement. I'm ready for it.
Yes. So sorry about botching the name of your practice.
That's fine. It still exists. It's fine.
I read through it and I was like, wait, am I repeating myself? 7 locations. That's pretty impressive. Or is it like close together in Florida? Because Florida's a much bigger state than most people anticipate.
Well, we got some on East Coast, some in Central, some on West Coast, South Florida. We tried the North Florida, and God bless the people that can go up there and break ground. We were there for a little bit, but I think we're in some areas that kind of work for us. You got to know what works for you. So.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you for being here. I'd love to jump right in and
Yeah.
start by defining what social determinants of health are before we talk about mental health, because I think a lot of just people in general don't believe, well, first of all, they don't understand what it entails. And then they also don't believe necessarily that some of these components are really crucial to our communities and what we do as speech language practitioners.
Absolutely, because we're talking about our communities. These are our communities that we're serving. So when we're talking about social determinants of health, there's something called Healthy People 2030, in which it gives a framework, like 358 measurable ways in which to achieve this better health, better wellness. And it talks about the social determinants of health that impact an individual's health. So we have economic stability. So even though someone may have a certain level of economic income coming in, is it stable? That's very important. Education access and quality of education. We also have healthcare access and quality, neighborhood and built environments in which someone actually lives, social and community context. How much support do they have? As we're wanting individuals in, adult practice or pediatric practice, we're wanting them to change and have all these different health behaviors and positive health behaviors. But what is the support there? Are we just assuming they have all the support without checking on that and adjusting the way that we administer speech language therapy?
Yeah, and I think two of the things that I talk a lot about when it comes to social determinants of health that I try to encompass all of them, the 5 domains, but the two things that I think have been really important, particularly when I worked in acute care that was in a much more rural setting, was food access and then the educational component, because a lot of people really in the community find it hard to believe that while most of our community education in the health system is written on about a 9th grade or so reading level, there's a ton of people out there who are not able to digest that information, decipher that information. Their caregivers can't. A lot of people, I think, in the community at large and within our field don't understand that this is a problem, because we've got to adjust. And then you throw in people who are bilingual or multilingual, and that's a whole different situation altogether. But food access was for me, it was really eye-opening during the pandemic, because I live in a community that we have a local elementary school outside of like the 3 neighborhoods that comprise kind of where I live. And they had posted a lot on social media about when the school shut down, about we're providing free lunch, even though school is not in session. Please come by. You don't have to be part of this program or offered it to the community, because what people didn't understand was when they fill out those federal cards that talk about military service or who's receiving benefits via various governmental programs, they didn't realize that if the school, this was an unprecedented event, if the school lost or wasn't able to provide these meals, they lost their funding for the following year based on that access. And so a lot of people were like, oh, well, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't take advantage of that. And I was like, it wasn't taking advantage of. It was making sure that these programs continue to exist for those who really, truly do benefit and need it. So I think, that's, to me, that's such an important part. And when we think about, no matter what your setting is, at that point, I was working in acute care, and then I moved into outpatient to start an adult program. And we had a local market that was kind of in the middle of a food desert. There's
Yep.
about a 5 to 6 mile gap on the main highway between these two major grocery stores, but there's a retirement community in the
Mhm.
middle of it. And so a lot of the people that were accessing that were able to access food were walking or using short-term, like the bus system is not great here. I think it does okay, but it was a short ride on the bus for them to go to the local farmers market. So when the owners closed it down, it was really impactful for my patients and for my community. And I just thought that was huge, just
Yeah,
really huge.
and a lot of the things where people start to question, why should I care or why should I engage in that? A lot of that is that individualized thinking, and it's fine because even as speech language pathologists, what are we? We're looking at individuals, and we're looking at things from a clinical aspect instead of a public health aspect. Big problem. I know this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but when you're just talking in one language in public health, clinical and public health, we have to become a little bit more bilingual and talk about things in the context of public health. Why? We have to start being comfortable having a seat at the table to talk about these things. People are still stuck on, no one knows what I do. No one knows what I do. Well, in order to make sure people know what you do, you might have to say it in a different way. And you may have to think a little bit more so about someone else's perspective and their needs and their health determinants. And I think all of this helps us to communicate better and solve some of these problems within our community.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think understanding that our role isn't always so cut and dried and just speech therapy or language therapy or dysphagia therapy. It's, especially when you work in, like I've worked in a variety of settings. And so you see the caregiver and how much the caregiver's support needs are. And the
Oh,
caregiver
yeah.
isn't always a family member. Sometimes it's a neighbor, sometimes it's a close friend. And they don't always have the historical knowledge of like the entire case history of that
Mhm.
client. And that's a challenge, but it's also a challenge for them to navigate these new diagnoses. And
Mhm.
I'm like you, I'm tired of people saying, oh, no one knows what I did. Well, then speak up, tell them what you do, be
Talk.
loud, make
Yeah,
people uncomfortable.
big mouth, big mouth. It's okay. It's okay. They'll call you big mouth and so what? But you'll change lives, you'll make things happen. Just talking about access, and we are going to talk about mental health determinants here, but talking about access and just being, in the right place, the right time. I worked with Smarty Ears, Barbara Fernandez, got some communication boards up in our city of Plantation. I went to one city, they were like, oh, no, we can't have your logo on it. I don't really care. But the other one, the other city who is bigger and has more organization, they said, absolutely. So we got 9 boards there. But in doing that, it actually changed the Parks and Recreation Department. Now they had to add a line item for special needs equipment. It didn't exist before. So
Wow.
I when they told me that, they waited. And this is the thing, they waited in the community meeting to tell me that. And I'm telling you, Renee, I was about to cry. I was about to cry. I was starting to sweat and I was like, keep it together, because what we're talking about is something that did not exist. Policy change, making an impact that's going to affect so many families and so many, not only children, but adults. It's going to open up so much more. So now someone can say, oh, let's look at that budget. I propose we increase that budget. It actually exists. So there's so much that we can do as speech language pathologists, and we're policy initiators. I'll just
Yeah.
leave that there.
Well, and the fact that I'm like you, I'm stuck on this whole like the Healthy People 2030, which was Healthy People 2020 before.
It was.
And prior to that, the class standards came out in 2010, and we're 14 years into I think it's something like, last I looked, 13 states or 18 states have adopted their own versions of the class standards, and making sure that the cultural linguistic measures are in place, the access to things like the temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, is still in place. And there's so many other programs that we could talk about, and I don't want to go down, because I'll go down that rabbit hole and I won't come back.
We won't come back. We'll be like, see y'all. See you later.
This is a whole different
Just-
podcast than what you thought you were attending. But the point is that so many of these things were enacted as legislation and governmental programs, and it takes so long for everybody, and if you're familiar, as for listeners, if you're familiar with how the government works at the state level, the local level, I won't even talk about the national level, but yeah. But it takes so long to the program. I think that they roll out these programs and they're great. They have these great parameters, they have these great ideas, but it takes so long to implement things, and the funding gets tied up, and then the funding gets deleted or omitted or reduced or whatever. And if you aren't following it within your state, you really lose sight of how this impacts communities. For me, I started practicing in 2010. And so one of the things that I thought, my first job, I was like, oh man, the aphasia groups, why aren't we doing aphasia groups? Why don't we have a support group for the caregivers of aphasia groups? And it's funny, I haven't worked for that health system since 2017, and they still don't have it.
Wow.
And it's a great health system. That's the thing. Like, we had good support, but everything came down to funding and how can we build this? And I'm like, I'll do it as a volunteer, because I just thought it was that important. But you couldn't find access to space. You had to pay for the space. And it's like, you have all these unused rooms at the end of the day. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And it's, why are you quibbling? The lights are on whether someone's in the room or not, because it's a hospital.
Right.
So I don't understand the conversation that we're having right now, but that's a whole, again, I could go down that rabbit hole too. But I should probably steer.
That's what happens when you get in there, you get your hands dirty as SLP, and you come out with these stories, and you see behind the scenes how budgets become allocated, how research gets funded. Very interesting stuff. So kind of leads us to the social determinants of mental health.
Yes. I was going to steer back.
You see that segue? It did not even. But social determinants of mental health, these are actual aspects that will not only increase the likelihood of an onset of mental health disorder, but it can also exacerbate existing mental health disorders. So very, very important. Why are we talking about this? Again, this is your community. This affects your community. This is happening right now in your community. We just have a better way of defining it and studying it, which, I would love to tell you some ways that we can further research. But some social determinants of mental health, we have socioeconomic disadvantages. We have early life adversity. So we're talking about perinatal and prenatal. We're talking about in the womb. Having those adversities in the womb has been shown to affect one's mental health later in life. Childhood adversity and trauma, migration status, that comes with a lot of anxiety, depression, uncertainty, insecurity in every area, food insecurity, neighborhood insecurity on every level. So that's where a lot of the anxiety and just not feeling safe. Ethno-racial discrimination. That's a big one. Also, we have inequalities experienced by the LGBTQ plus communities, gender-based inequalities, very, very true. Loneliness and isolation, and also neurodiversity. I added that one, neurodiversity, individuals that constantly have to mask. Constantly masking. And then individuals, families loved ones and actual people that have been involved in the justice system through juvenile detention or the incarceration. That has ripple effects throughout the community. It affects employment within the community. It also it affects the family. It affects generations. And then something that they didn't list here was age. Okay, aging. Let's keep in mind that is not easy at all, but that is a social determinant of health because so many things change. Support changes, network changes, right? Certain groups change. I remember my grandmother sitting with my grandmother and she just started crying. She's like, so many of my friends have passed away.
Yeah.
I will never ever forget that. And just the sorrow and the grief that comes with all of those changes and network and friendship support insecurities really can impact the ability to cope on a daily basis and have stable mental health, thriving mental health.
Yeah, I want to go put my cheerleader outfit on and get my pom-poms because like everything you said, I'm
Wait.
I have a story. I have a story.
I know, right? I have a story. I have a story.
Well, and I will say,
Yeah.
aging. I taught a class on aging last fall, and it was about normal aging and what normal aging isn't based on different cultures. There's a lot of cultures where people don't retire, they don't stop working because their life's work, they enjoy it, they get benefit, they get social interaction out of it, they still get that feedback and use their intellectual capabilities. And so in some cultures people don't retire and they basically work until they die, but it's not, to them they don't feel like it's work because it's not predicated by these irrational expectations of productivity and let's work 70 hours a week because I'm going to make you do this, that, and the other extra. And so that was a really interesting course for me to teach because I worked in assisted living as PRN for a little bit. And one of the things that was played out over and over were patients who moved into assisted living because either their spouse had died and now they had a diagnosis of dementia, or their spouse had died and they just weren't physically able, even though their cognitive abilities were intact, to take care of their home, or take care of the yard or whatever the case may be. But by and large, what the problem became and what I saw a lot of when it comes to mental health and depression was people who were elderly, geriatric, 80s, 90s, had lived in another state for a very long, like basically their entire life. They had lived in another state. And what happened was their spouse passed away and the kids lived here. And the kids were like, oh, it'd be easier on me to take care of mom if I move her here. But mom had lived in Florida for 55 years and she had her community and she had her church and she had her people and her, familiar surroundings. And they moved the patient here, put her in assisted living. So she had supervision. And then she cried every day. And that was so, for me, that was so hard as a therapist to see that because it was just, I wanted to like just go in and give them a hug. Just so sad. But it's so true. And it became the cycle for most of those patients, whether they had cognitive decline or not. This mental health aspect could also present as a version of cognitive decline because they were so sad and so unable to focus on taking care of themselves that it looked like they were having a cognitive issue when in actuality it was a mental health problem.
Yeah. And there was some, rightfully so, disorientation. There's a lot of disorientation. And then you have the disorientation that happens with the shifting of agency. Can we talk about that for a second?
Absolutely.
About that, I made the decisions what movie I wanted to see. I got to look up, oh, okay, I know I shouldn't see that show in front of so and so, but I'm gonna see it a little bit later. Bridgerton, here we go. You're a grown person. You are a grown person. But then now we get into this infantilized situation sometimes of a living facility, and that's disorienting. It's
Mhm.
enough to turn a lot of people's mind and just have them check out and feel powerless. Powerless. Feeling powerless is very disorienting. And it does exacerbate any feelings of isolation, loneliness, leading to depression. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then when you think about, the people who, in the United States, most people do retire, or maybe they do some consulting work, but for by and large, a lot of these people, I worked in a nice assisted living facility where it wasn't a skilled nursing, it was an assisted living, which was pretty expensive, but we kind of had a like who's who of some of the people in our community. A lot of retired military high ranking officers as well. And so what I found was with them, it was like they retired and they were used to, some people wanted to get up at 6 a.m. Some people wanted to sleep in. Some people want to get up at 10 and might want to stay up till 2 a.m. and do what they did.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Yes. Why is
and
it a
that was,
problem staying up till 2 a.m.? It's like, oh, Mr. Rogers, he's up, he's walking around. Well, you
he's
know,
he's paying like $4,500 to live there a month, but okay.
do.
Yeah, yeah, or being told to eat at a certain time, no longer
Ah,
having the
ah,
choice of what foods you like or what foods you want to eat. And in some cases, the choice of their clothing, they, downsize their wardrobe. And
yeah.
some of that sounds kind of like
Mhm.
irrelevant, but when you think about people who have lived their entire life to then be told and earn these things that they're happy to have, it is really off-putting. And then you have the other people who, the flip side of like, I work with a lot of individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And you kind of see that similar situation when people get moved from a group home to another group home. They don't
Mhm.
always take all their belongings with them. And you see the same thing, or you get a 20-something-year-old man, grown man, who has a diagnosis of intellectual disability and autism, and you sit him in a group home and all of his roommates go to day support and he sits in the house all day with two older women that are his caretakers, and he doesn't have anything to do but watch TV. And then you wonder why he's acting out, or you wonder why he wants to go
Right.
into his room and destruct property, because he doesn't have a purpose. He doesn't have anything else to do. And
Mm-hmm.
I think when you think of it in terms of, a lot of times I think we think of it in terms of like I don't want to say normal because no one's really normal, but a typical developed person, adult.
Mm-hmm.
When you throw in an atypical thing like an intellectual disability, autism, a lot of these clients that I work with now have multiple diagnoses: schizoaffective disorder, bipolar. I have someone right now who we kind of touched on, like for a hot second, incarceration. He actually said when he was young that he was going to burn the building down, and he got incarcerated for that at 12 years old.
Oh my God.
And so, because no one knew, he had moved from community to community. And so now we've got a new person looking at him and going, oh, he says he's going to burn the building down, I'm calling the police. And he calls the police and they incarcerate him. And it just becomes a snowball of things that we don't realize until we're involved, because now this patient's been diagnosed with a speech language disorder or a dysphagia or a cognitive communication disorder. And you read the history sometimes and you're like, why the heck didn't somebody else do something about this? This is
Right.
nuts.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
These are our patients, it's our community. And, even if you're working in the school system, we do have in my private practice, we have a lot of contracts with schools, and we also contract directly with foster care support systems and departments. So we have the opportunity to read those intake forms, and absolutely will, break your heart. But when you talk about a lot of these areas of social determinants of mental health, we see it. We really do see it. We see the social economic disadvantage. We see the instability. We see early life adversity and how that plays a part in the child and how their coping skills. And we see it all. We see it all. So when researchers now are saying, okay, it's enough to see it, and it's enough to think about how it affects the way we deliver primary care, secondary care, tertiary care. They say, okay, yes, beyond that, we have to have some parameters. How are we going to do research and policy differently? Now we got this information, but how are we going to do? So some of the areas that researchers are saying, and they're saying, we have the money allocated towards trying to decrease health disparities. We have to make sure that we keep mental health in there. We need to come up with programs and ways in which the end goal is to decrease poverty. We have to increase food security, access, education. We have to we have to look at ways to, because there's such an intersectional aspect to all of these social determinants. For instance, it could be a gay couple that is experiencing migration and socioeconomic disadvantage and ethno-racial discrimination. So there's a lot of cross points here. So when we are looking at policy and we're looking at programs, we need to think about ways to be multi-directional and try to help different areas, different populations, different groups, as many groups as we can, just to have a bigger impact with the policies and the monies that we're spending. So, and that also has to be the direction of research.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the whole, I won't say the whole point, but a big part of what we're talking about is how this relates to us as speech language pathologists, because a lot of people they hear about it and they maybe want to learn more about it, but they don't necessarily see the impact of why we need to be mindful of it and why we need to be change makers and stakeholders in those policies and be making noise with our legislators and our community advocates, because it really does trickle down to our patients.
It does.
Yeah. So do you have
I do.
No,
the conversation, we just gotta have, I'm like, yeah. Bob.
I know I gave a few examples, but I want you to give some examples as well.
Are you taking advantage of our new amazing feature? The Certificate Tracker. The free CE Tracker allows you to keep track of all of your CEUs, whether they are earned with us at speechtherapypd.com or through another provider. Simply upload your certificate to your registered account and you're all set. So come join the fastest growing CE provider, speechtherapypd.com.
So I'm in private practice and we always have the intake, and it's very important. We're thinking about, okay, how do I impact social determinants and social determinants for health? Well, we're looking at, can I change their economic stability? No, but something that we do is we do pass on different resources within our community.
Yeah.
Now, how long did it take me to do that? Not long. It really didn't. And I keep a little Google Drive, and I could always pass it on to my families. Do I have to? No. Did someone pay me to do it? No. Is it my job? Oh, yes, it is. It is. It is. It is. It is. And like I said, it doesn't cost me anything. Now I'm in school, so I turn everything into an infographic, with hyperlinks because I'm nerding out on Renee. I'm nerding big time. It's a problem.
No, it's not. It's a gift. It's a gift to the community.
So I love to hand that out. I love to connect people. And I always say I don't have the answer, but I have some ways that I can connect you. Also looking at when we say quality, education quality, and what we do, we're really talking about cultural responsive quality, right? Not just I did it and it felt good to me. Well, how was it perceived to your patient? Was it relevant to your patient? And it could be the therapy materials that you're using. And it's also having these conversations. Someone's just out of the hospital and they're home. Instead of you getting out your little walk, your little workbook, and you're just like, I gotta check this off, check this off, check this off. Hey, take a beat and say, hey, I just want to check in with you. I know you probably don't have the space, but can we take a little beat and have a space? How are you doing? That's
What
some
do
of
you
the
need?
what you need. What and many times they can't really articulate or like, wait, what are you getting at? Some of the military, what are you getting at? Hey, I just wanted to see how you're doing. And those can be some of the best sessions of your life. It's not about me, but I'm telling you, it impacts me and of their life too. And it makes such an amazing impact. Asking them how, different background, they might disclose something. Oh, my child, recently had a near death experience or near drowning. We have a lot of families because we do a lot of medical complex care in the home with pediatrics as well. And we work a lot with adults as well. So it's very important to talk these things over, and have these difficult conversations and make sure that you have your loved ones that you can get filled up with, because this is hard work. This is not the easy road. The easy road is like, I'm going to just stick to my workbook and then I'm going to go home. Having these conversations can really impact you. When the family members, you're one of the first ones they call when their little one passes away. That's hard. That's hard. And then you got to be there for the therapist too. And then you got to have space for them to grieve. This is we're talking about the social determinants of mental health for our patients, but then what about our colleagues, Yeah. What about our employees too? So there's all of these things we're talking about. We got to see the intersectionality of it, and we have to see how it affects our colleagues and how it affects our students. Ooh.
Yes.
Ooh, our undergrads, our grads, our interns. And if you don't think it does, let me tell you, baby, it really does. It really does.
Oh, it does.
It does. Healthy people 2030 is not just about patients. It's also about our field. It's also about having a healthy workplace, healthy education system for our future SLPs to be, and audiologists.
Well, I want to circle back because I want to get back to what you were talking about with your colleagues, because I want to talk about that a little bit. The pandemic thing, it's hard for me coming from acute care at that point, but I want to touch on a couple things that you said. But something that happened last week, and I really had, as my grandmother would have said, a hissy fit. Like I had a hissy fit last week because what I saw was, and I'm just going to say it like I said it in my own mind, why are you giving your patient visual supports who is a grown Black man that depicts white little children? This is like my older version of me. If that had been my 30-year-old version of me or my 25-year-old, I would have probably like lost it and got fired.
Mhm.
But my
Mhm.
older version, my more mature version was like, hey, I just wanted to talk to you for a second because I don't know if you realize, because if it bothered me, maybe it didn't resonate so much with our patient with IDD, but the 4 other Black men in the room who helped take care of them, I'm sure they were probably like, why did you pop out some little white children on his visual supports and his visual schedule? Because I was incensed.
Yeah,
I was gonna use a different, less professional word, but I'm gonna say
right.
incensed.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
really, it still bothers me right now, and it's been a whole week because it was last.
You're still not over it. You're like,
I'm
I'm
not.
sad.
And I said what I wanted to say at the time, but I really, it just did not sit well with me. And I think when you, as a professional, you have to think about it in that context. We are so fortunate now to have access to these materials and ways to use software to create different skin tones and different hair colors and different hairstyles and glasses or not glasses, hearing aids or not, tracheostomies in the pit. Like we have all this access that we didn't have even 10, 15 years ago. We have all this access now. We have to use it. It's there for a reason. And when you're not, to me, you're just being lazy
Yeah. Yeah.
because
And
you're not being culturally responsive at all.
no, it's not a good place to be in that lazy spot or be with, a head in the ground. I once had a SLPA, and I have many, but I had an SLPA, and she was so super excited. She was going to do some oral motor exercises, and she found something on the internet, and it was okay. And I'm because we're going there. This is what we're talking about right now, right? So it was for an African American little boy, 5 years old, and mom was about to come in the session. I said, okay, let me see what you got. Something. She's like, oh, it's the cutest little thing, and it was just little monkeys, little monkeys. I said, you can't use.
Stop.
Yeah, no, I'm not stopping. I'm not stopping. That's what happened, and so now I had to present to her exactly why
That meant, yeah.
we're not going to use this right now. And she was so proud of it. She was so proud of it. And I understand. I said, okay. And I had to do it so gently and say, I know you're super proud of it, but that's just something that doesn't resonate well with African American, because that's been a derogatory term, and it was a lot of tears. When I tell you it was a lot of tears, it was shock. I think it was mostly shock, but it was a lot of tears, and it was a lot of walking through the moment, and she just became a different therapist after that. So she
Mm-hmm.
couldn't necessarily just say, oh, now I've got to think about race and check my bias. I told her I have to check my bias too. So it's part of it.
Sure.
It's an ongoing work, right? It's an
Yes.
ongoing work that we do. It's the good work. It really is the good work, and it's what transforms our communities. That's the culturally responsive care we're talking about, the changes that happen within. So yes.
Just like vegetarians in the hospital, not every vegetarian just eats a raw salad, especially if they need an altered diet modification. I've seen that too, where the doctor ordered a vegetarian diet based on their cultural preference, and they got raw salads every day, and it's like,
What about the beans? What
right? Give me some rice, beans, something like lentils. I don't know.
plantains?
Yes. Yeah, and it's so interesting because there are so many people in our field who are being vocal and doing the work, and it's just that implementation at the systemic level that we need to be at. And I think when you factor in all these productivity standards and all these other things that we have to do when you work for a health system, it's like they want to shut that down and they don't necessarily want to allow for that, but it needs to happen, because if not, those of us who are maturing, I'm not going to a place like that. I'm gonna go sit in the backyard and not let it happen how it happens or something. I don't know, because
I don't know what I'm gonna do. I think I just need a tiny house. I think that's all I need. I was
yeah,
thinking about a tiny house.
yeah, like a she shed,
We just need a tiny house, I think.
right? Yeah,
I don't need much. I told my kids I don't need much. I just need a little tiny house and I won't bother nobody. And I'll babysit. I'll babysit your kids and your grandkids. I will be the best, but I just need a little tiny house. I think that's all I need.
I
Or an
like
art.
it.
Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. But please just don't. I'll be good. I promise.
That's funny.
Oh.
Well, and I think thinking back, when you brought up a really great point about the mental health of our colleagues and the mental health of for those people who are in supervisory roles, or hiring roles, even who have have a private practice or in leadership, who are hiring not only SLPs but also SLPAs, and then we have our audiology colleagues as well, who a lot of times tend to have more private practice settings, or they're working with an otolaryngologist or something like that. The pandemic brought about a lot of those mental health challenges because of the working conditions. And I
Mm.
still have people now that know that I worked in acute care all 3 years, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, you remember when we were all doing telehealth?" And I'm just like, "No, no, I do not.
No, I
No, I
don't.
do not. No, I remember hoping I wouldn't die every day. That's what I remember. I remember taking my scrubs off in my garage and my new neighbor probably seeing things he shouldn't have seen because I didn't want to take that funk into my house and my family. That's what
Right.
I remember.
I
But I
remember a
think,
lot of home health, and being
yeah,
like, what's your status? Well, I did have COVID. Well, of course, everybody had COVID at that time and all the exacerbation and swallowing issues after that. And
and the
yeah, that
cognitive.
was and cognitive, a lot of brain fog, that was a very kind of scary time. It was a
Yeah.
very scary time. Driving around on deserted roads, and it was not a pleasant time. It was very
Driving
weird.
on a deserted road, I have to say I love that, because my commute went from 27 minutes to 18. When school started
Okay,
back,
like
I was
that.
angry. I was
Yeah,
angry. I was like,
everybody
man, people
out.
are messing up my commute.
No,
But yeah, and I had colleagues that I worked with that had first responder spouses, that also weren't getting the appropriate PPE or didn't have enough PPE. So some
oh
people
my,
were forced to choose. And there's a lot of things that happen. And it's kind of interesting because I was just talking to my husband about this last night, about really truly feeling like, after that, I know that I have PTSD from that. Um, and it's just crazy thinking about like the dreams and the things that I would think about. And I never had a panic attack in my life, but I had two during that time, and it was bad. And it was atypical of me. But also, when you have, and have a point of saying all that, is when you have this trauma thing that happens, or you have multi-trauma events that happen, whether you're a person with a communication disorder or not, it
Mhm.
does impact your mental health, and it does impact your ability to live, to interact with relationships that are familiar or new, even old relationships. It impacts your, like you said earlier, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs: food, safety, shelter. We didn't feel comfortable eating at work because we were worried about contracting the disease. It was airborne and we didn't know. Being safe, we didn't
Mhm.
always have access to the appropriate PPE. Shelter, oh gosh, we went from sharing an office with, like, we had a team space with like 5 people in it, to having 15 people in our space in the pandemic. And it was like,
It's
same
crazy.
thing happened with our patients, we saw people doubled up in rooms that were not husband and wife. They were not brother and sister. They were completely not familiar with one another, but they put them in isolation rooms together because they needed the space. And I remember one of our nephrologists coming out one day and he goes, wait, am I supposed to like come out, decontaminate myself, and then re-gear up to go see the other person in the same room? He's like, what are the rules? Like, dude, I have no idea.
Do you remember? I remember that. I'm like, what level of PPE are we using now? What is this stiff level, or what level are we? What kind of PPE are we talking? What, you know? Oh, it was the rules were changing, and just trying to feel patients feeling like I don't have access to enough. I'm scared all the toilet paper is going to run out again. I'm
Right.
what? You know, things that we never had to think about, and those things are still out there residually.
Yeah,
People,
and a lot of our patients were very worried about us as healthcare workers too. And so you sort of
oh,
saw both sides of the coin of, you know, you don't want to reflect that onto the patient, but they could feel it, they could sense it, because you've got, you know, 4 or 5, you've got a nurse, a CNA, you've got a PT and OT speech, you got a
yep,
dietitian, your physician, you got all these people coming in and out of the room, and they're just any given day in a normal hospital. Well, there's no normal hospitalizations either, but in a hospitalization without PPE, that's still like a train wreck, right? Because everybody's coming in and everybody has a different style, and not everybody introduces themselves and runs through the script of what they're there for and what they're going to be doing and how long it should take. But at the same time, then you have this other thing involved, and the patient's like terrified of everything, if they're even cognitively intact or awake,
sure, yeah,
either or. So yeah, I say all that to say I found it to be impactful when I went to outpatient, because a lot of patients would come in with long COVID and they were still very hesitant on who they would be interacting with. They were very hesitant about the waiting room situation and the fact that they had to sit next to someone they didn't know, and maybe they were masked, but the person next to them wasn't. And they had a lot of anxiety about that. And these weren't necessarily people who had been diagnosed with anxiety, but again, these other things that came into play with safety, uncertainty, all that played into their care. And it also plays into their access to care, because they may not be motivated to come back
right. Oh, right,
or
yeah,
to come in at all.
yeah. It was what a difficult time, very difficult, and just I think in different countries, I had talked to some colleagues from different countries, and to see how people are coping with it now and how they did cope with it. I talked to some nurses and researchers from the Philippines, and leaning into more, you know, folk wisdom and things that they knew true, you know, as far as, if I do this, this will lead me to better health, or this will increase my chance. Because it's difficult to navigate your health when you don't have all of the answers, right? You're
Right.
going to try to find the answers the best way possible, and there are maybe multiple answers. There are a lot of cultural answers that exist. So yeah, as SLPs and audiologists, we're thinking about the social determinants of mental health, and we're trying to make sure that we give that cultural responsive care. We have to be open to the cultural answers as well, and engage in those conversations. How does this, you know, the information I'm giving you, how does it how does it uh, how does it compare to your cultural wisdom of what your families might do in this situation? Does it seem like it flows in the same direction, or is it kind of opposite of what is more, you know, intuitive for you to, you know, do? And having those conversations just for a minute, it honors our patients so much. and it helps them to feel safer.
Yes.
And that when they're in a, in a hospital and there's no one they know there, but to have someone actually acknowledge and honor their culture, that is very affirming, to address. I was in an evaluation just recently with a little one, and the mother was there, and I just thought I would ask, oh, does dad want to Skype in? Or she's like, well, he's not in the picture, but, thank you. And I said, oh, well, if you ever want to Zoom, she's like, actually, he's in prison. I'm like, well, if he has access, you're more than, and I was, yes, sir, no, sir. I was making sure I extended that dignity to everyone involved and making sure that we have inclusive spaces, regardless of what your politics are.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone deserves access to quality education. That means culturally responsive education, culturally responsive healthcare. Everyone deserves access, no matter what you think. I don't care if you have 2 dads, 2 moms, does not matter we are in a place where we provide quality healthcare in many settings, but point blank, everyone deserves the utmost access.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that those are 2 really big areas that those could be 2 other talks really with,
Right.
Especially within the juvenile detention system and cognitive communication deficits and not being addressed at that level, or not even in some, in the adult realm too, not even being acknowledged in some spaces where it's almost like people are made fun of, or they're kind of the target within the judicial system of their cognitive communication deficit, or their cognitive deficit compounded by their culture or their race. We know that that's true. We have plenty of literature to back that up. And I think that that's a really interesting topic too. And then also, boy, really did I lose my train. I started thinking about that and I was like, wow, we could really get in.
It's the wisdom of our age just shining through. That's what it is.
Well, there's so much, I think this is so much of a broad aspect. And again, I think a lot of people they might acknowledge it, but they don't really realize how this trickles down into what they do, because as communication science professionals, we do provide more of an intimate space, meaning not in inappropriate intimate space, but we're typically one-on-one or one-on, caregiver plus the patient. And they all feel this after a session or 2, if you're doing it right, they feel this safe space to be able to come in and talk about things that may not look like traditional therapy, but it's impactful. How many times have you had a patient or a caregiver or both come in and say, I had a really tough weekend. My family member passed away, or I had a really tough weekend. My kids didn't want to see me this weekend because they knew it was hard for me to talk, or I couldn't eat with my family at the holiday, so I chose not to go. I mean, these are all scenarios that I think pretty much every SLP has heard, and probably some audiologists in various scenarios. And how does that impact their therapy? Because that's really what it boils down to, is not just the counseling aspect, the education aspect, and the cultural responsivity, but how does that impact their ability to participate is what it boils down to. How does that impact their ability to go home or into their community and try to participate or communicate and use the therapeutic techniques that we're trying to teach them, when they can't get past, they couldn't have dinner with their family because they have dysphagia and they were embarrassed, or they felt a certain way because they weren't able to communicate with their best friend of 30 years because they were embarrassed or they were ashamed. There's a lot of things that come up in our therapy sessions, in our therapy rooms, or even in the hospital rooms, that are the very thing that we've been talking about all night, that a lot of people think, oh, well, that's not really us, we should probably refer. And you can refer all day long.
You can.
But you
You
can
really
also say active listening in the scope of an education part of what you provide as a therapeutic technique. You can also say that, because some people come back and say, well, how do I document that? Well, you document that caregiver brought up new novel needs based on these scenarios that happen in their community life or their personal life or whatever, and you document it that way and said provided active listening, provided community supports, talk through strategies to
exactly.
Mitigate these communication challenges or whatever it was. You can 1,000,000% document that.
And it's a lot of the time, I have a patient right now that is trying to navigate this new found communication style that includes aphasia. And this is someone that was a multi-district specialist in civil engineering and urban planning, you name it. This is what, he did, and very precise, very analytical, and he's come so far, but still acknowledging there's some frustration there because you're wanting to express yourself, and also getting into, this is hard. This is very hard. I'm the one that, and he, said, this is very hard. I'm the one that would usually speak up in the conversation. And, sometimes men feel like me speaking up helps my wife feel more, a little bit more safe. So there's so many different dynamics even happening between, their partner and their spouse, and the way they see themselves and how they've always been able to communicate. And there's so many things, just holding space and allowing them. And I don't have to, solve the problems. I tell them I'm not going to be able to solve your problems. I can listen. We can bounce ideas off of each other. We can come up with things that we can work on in therapy to make your communication a little bit easier to get past those moments. We can come up with some strategies instead of getting frustrated, breathing in, breathing out, thinking about what we can point to. So practicing those things. I won't have all the answers, but it makes such a difference having a therapist in their corner that can listen and come up with solutions with them and try to mitigate this new change in their communication status. It's what we do. That's what we got to do. That's what we got to do. And that's what the sessions are. That's what's called for in the sessions, point blank.
Yes. Functional for sure.
Yes.
And I've always been a big proponent of that. This was just, you did my heart good. This is just good because last week was just a couple of those little things that happened just really worked me up for this. So I thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. And this, to me, was just very helpful and hopefully helpful to the listeners as well. And I think just pointing out several different ways that it impacts our patients in several different realms was very, very insightful. So I thank you for being here. And I thank you for agreeing to share your expertise tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again, Pam. And I look forward to seeing you again.
No problem. See you soon. Bye-bye.
If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. Each episode comes with an accompanying course on speechtherapypd.com. available for a 0.1 ASHA CEU. And just for our listeners, get $20 off any subscription with promo code BRAINSTORMS20. SpeechTherapyPD.com is run by SLPs for SLPs. We've got the largest library of ASHA CEU eligible courses out there, adding fresh content every week. Remember, use BRAINSTORMS20 to get $20 off access to over 1,000 courses for an entire year. Head over to SpeechTherapyPD.com for more information and start earning CEs today. Thanks for tuning in to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. And don't forget, SpeechTherapyPD.com is your go-to for all things ASHA CEUs. Your positive reviews and support mean the world to us. We'd love for you to drop us a quick review and hit that follow button.